second, and then the floor is yours.
I can start.
Yes, you can start.
Fine, super. So, dear friends, dear guests, what the left group in the EP is putting on the table today does not yet exist in this way. With this black book, we provide clear evidence that structural, state, intentional violence is being exercised against refugees at the EU's external borders. 1,500 pages with details, maps, acts of violence, illegal pushbacks against women, men, children. It represents a selection of nearly 900 testimonies of violent pushbacks representing 12,654 victims of pushbacks. They represent a glimpse even of the reality as this has become a daily practice in the EU. The meaning and purpose of the Black Book is not only to collect facts. We are accusing the EU and the member states of not only accepting the structural violence, but of using it as a mean of so-called reducing the flow of refugees. The EU and member states are thus systematically violating human rights and existing asylum law, which does not stipulate pushbacks as a legal means. Since the Arab revolutions exactly 10 years ago, it was yesterday, our group has visited almost all relevant places in the EU where attacks against refugees are on the agenda. And we have seen a dramatic increasing of violence against refugees over the years. We saw victims, we saw pushbacks, we stood at the graves of the dead. This black book would not be possible without all the activists and NGOs joining us today, members of the Border Violence Monitoring Network, that I wish you to thank for all considerable collective work to have these two books today released at the occasion of International Migrants Day. You have documented border violence, gathering testimonies and location at the considerable risk of being arrested or criminalized by European governments. Many of you, really many of you, have also endured attacks for speaking out against the violence and pushbacks carried out by law enforcement authorities, and we would like to express our strongest, our deepest support to you all. Special thanks to Milena and Hope, who coordinated this book, and I have to give all with my heart all the thanks to all contributors. I would like also thank Sea-Watch for joining us today. You have been a key witness of the Central Mediterranean refoulement by proxy to Libya, another illegal action in which Frontex plays a key role, as well as the Commission, who gave the green light to Frontex to transmit information to the Libyans for them to intercept people. The real scandal is, despite increased recognition that these acts are happening, they are being allowed to continue as not action has been taken by the Commission against member states committing pushbacks. They have instead been rewarded with additional emergency funding for border surveillance to cover the meals, salaries, fuels, surveillance material of the officers who are beating the people. EU funding has been used to perpetrate acts, them to intercept people. And what can I only say? Our messages today on the International Day is clear. No more fake monitoring mechanism, no more fake trainings of police officers, no more dubious interpretation of EU law. We need the suspension of funding for border surveillance to countries committing these acts in violation with EU and international law, infringement procedures, and accountability of those allowing this systematic practice to happen, starting with the Commission. And I hope we will have a good launching today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cornelia Ernst, coordinator of the work that the European Left does in the Committee on Civil Liberties that is responsible for migration policies. And my name is Malin Björk. I'm a member of the European Parliament from Sweden. And I just want to repeat what Cornelia has said. I will be moderating today, but to thank those ears and eyes that you are in civil society out there monitoring and bearing witness of what is happening. And just for you that I have a copy of the physical book here, and you can see how thick it is. I think it's, you know, it's worthwhile just showing you to it. And these are the testimonies that we will hear. That's volume 1, and here is volume 2, just about the same size. So without taking more time, I would like to give the floor to our guests. And I have first Hope Barker, who is a policy analyst on the Border Violence Monitoring Network. Please, Hope, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Or the screen.
Hello to everybody. My name is Hope Barker, and I'm here representing the Border Violence Monitoring Network, a coalition of human rights defenders from 14 grassroots NGOs and volunteer collectives who monitor and report on human rights violations from border areas along what has been termed the Balkan route. In the past 6 years, BVMN has collected 892 group testimonies which detail the experiences of over 12,600 people who were pushed back, both in border areas and deeper into European territory. And these numbers only refer to the testimonies collected by BVMN. The real number is likely much higher. Pushbacks are illegal. They occur when people on the move are forced back over borders without being afforded the opportunity to apply for asylum. This process violates the fundamental principle of non-refoulement, the enshrined human right to seek asylum, and the prohibition on collective expulsions. The violent manner in which pushbacks are carried out often violates Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, relating to the prohibition of torture and inhumane or degrading treatment. I will say this again. On a national, European, and international level, pushbacks are illegal. And yet we are here today to discuss the Black Book of Pushbacks, the most comprehensive repository of testimonies to date. Within its pages are first-hand accounts of violent pushbacks and accompanying analysis of patterns, trends, and statistics divided into country chapters. The evidence is so overwhelming, as Malin has shown, it had to be spread across 2 volumes of books. And still the official line from member states' governments is to deny that pushbacks are ongoing. This year, the Greek Minister of Migration and Asylum insisted that the country does not participate in so-called pushbacks, and the Croatian Ministry of Interior stated that they do not tolerate any violence in border protection. On this note, it's important to say that the second volume of the book is entirely dedicated to testimonies of pushbacks from Croatia, a member state that is currently on course for accession to the Schengen zone. Most concerning is not just that pushbacks are occurring. What this book reveals is that they are a well-coordinated, systematic practice that have become an increasingly prevalent yet unacknowledged pillar of the EU's border regime. This is particularly evident when considering the data collected by the network from a geographical perspective. In Croatia and Greece, nearly 90% of all recorded cases in 2020 detailed how pushback victims were subject to one or multiple forms of abuse or torture, making them the most violent pushback perpetrators. Particularly shocking stories that came out of the 2 member states this year include mock executions and the forced undressing of a 13-year-old in Croatia, and more recently, groups being stranded on an island in the Evros River between Greece and Turkey for days without food, water, or any kind of assistance. Both Croatia and Greece are located at the edges of the EU. Greece, the external frontier, and Croatia, the barrier to the Schengen zone. It is hard not to draw parallels here, and doing so begs the question, are such brutal realities the price we are willing to pay to fortify the borders of the Union? I have myself been conducting field interviews with people on the move in Greece for over 1.5 years now, and I've seen firsthand the way repression and violence has been ramped up, both in pushbacks and more generally against the community. Whilst pushbacks were previously occurring largely in border areas, the COVID-19 pandemic offered the state the opportunity to harshen their tactics, whilst everybody else appeared to be looking in the opposite direction. This year, pushbacks began occurring from deep into the mainland in cities like Thessaloniki, its local refugee camps, and even from pre-removal detention facilities in the north of the country. In one incident, a humanitarian aid distribution was targeted by police and beneficiaries were directly pushed back to Turkey. These land pushbacks follow certain stages and patterns that are easily observed. In the case of Thessaloniki, groups are apprehended and held in the police headquarters. From there, they are transferred to incommunicado detention sites in the highly militarized Evros border area, often in large blue police buses divided into cells that hold between 4 and 6 people. Groups are then held in these sites, which are often just large rooms in abandoned old barns or military complexes, until enough people have been accumulated. Often the group size reaches over 100. It is normally in these locations that groups of officers in black uniforms wearing balaclavas commit violent acts against people on the move. These range from prolonged beatings, use of electric discharge weapons, shaving of heads, and forced undressings. From there, groups are transported to the Evros border river, where further violence often occurs before they are loaded into rubber dinghies and ferried back to the Turkish side. A new development that has occurred in multiple testimonies is officers using people on the move to drive these dinghies. This can be read as a tactic to outsource blame for the actual pushback itself. Now, this story has been repeated in different variations so many times, it's hard to count. And yet the competent authorities deny that the practice is real. How could so many individuals unrelated to one another at different times and speaking with different reporters be telling pretty much the exact same story if there were no truth to the matter? And yet the EU continues to turn a blind eye to these testimonies. In fact, in February, when Erdogan opened the doors to Europe and bussed hundreds of people on the move to the border with Greece, who were met with rubber bullets, tear gas, and extreme violence, the European Commission expressed solidarity with the Greek government and pledged financial and personnel support through increasing the deployment of Frontex officers. Which brings us nicely to the issue of Frontex, an agency of the EU, and its involvement, or at the very least, complicity in the pushback practice. Multiple testimonies in the BVMN database mention the presence of German-speaking officers, vehicles with German license plates, and even observing uniforms with a light blue armband decorated with the EU flag. We know that Frontex is present in the Evros border region, and we know that pushbacks are a regular occurrence. At the very least, we would expect human rights violations to be monitored in regions where an EU agency has an established presence. This is not to mention the recent expose, which revealed that Frontex assets were actively involved in one pushback incident at the Greek-Turkish maritime border in the Aegean Sea, were present at another, and have been in the vicinity of 4 more since March. But I will leave this area to be further developed later by my more experienced colleague from Sea-Watch. Ultimately, the Black Book of Pushbacks and the BVMN database more generally are a living archive of what borders in Europe really mean to those navigating them, how they experience systematic human rights deprivations, violence, and even torture at the hands of those tasked with protecting them. In these 1,500 pages are the stories of people who came to Europe seeking safety and a better life, and whose experiences have been met with denial or have fallen on deaf ears. We, the Border Violence Monitoring Network, call for perpetrators to be held accountable and for impunity to end. And we intend to produce new editions of this book every year until that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Hope Barker from the Border Violence Monitoring Network. I just want to add that those of you that want to ask questions, you can do so in the Q&A box, and write in your questions, and we will pick them up and ask them to the panelists. And indeed, these testimonies are so very shocking in many ways. So I'm sure people have a lot to say. So now I will give the floor to one other colleague from the Border Violence Monitoring Network, Milena Zajkovic, based in Zagreb in Croatia, who's been working with us. You are one of the head of the advocacy work that you are doing. Thank you for being with us. You've been coordinating the publishing of this I would say these two bricks of violence and witnesses of what's going on. So please, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Malin. I wish we could have been here at such some better opportunity, but I am nevertheless very thankful for the time and also the opportunities that you are constantly giving to our groups. Apart from my work in the Border Violence Monitoring Network, I also serve as the president of the NGO Are You Serious, which is a Croatian-based NGO committed to providing humanitarian aid, implementing integration programs, and monitoring of human rights violations of refugees. And we have started observing cases of pushbacks in early 2016. This is a period that is not covered in the book, but it was soon after the closure of the safe humanitarian corridor that was passing through our country. And first, there were sporadic cases, illegal, but not violent. They were happening on the border with Serbia, where thousands were stranded, desperately trying to cross the border that was open just a week earlier. And as frustration grew on both sides, violence skyrocketed following the Hungarian model. And with our partners from Center for Peace Studies and Welcome Initiative, we have published several comprehensive reports on pushbacks in that early years, hoping they would trigger effective investigation. But unfortunately, Croatian and European institutions remained silent. They stayed silent even after the death of little Madina, a well-documented case of a 6-year-old Afghan girl who died minutes after she was pushed back from Croatia to Serbia in November 2017. Her mother would later describe to us how they have begged for mercy, for a chance to stay and ask for asylum. But they were ordered by police officers to walk back to Serbia following train tracks. Only minutes after she was pushed out of the safety of European Union, the girl was hit by a train and died. Croatian institutions were also silent in 2018, when two 12-year-old kids were shot in their faces by Croatian police officers near the Bosnian border, and one of them barely survived. Later, they would also tell us how they were pinned to the ground by Croatian police, screaming and bleeding, while officers yelled and threatened with more gun violence if they dared to move. The institutions remained silent in 2019, when within only 10 days, 2 people were shot by Croatian border police. The Minister of Interior described it as accidents and even had the guts to blame victims for near-fatal shootings. But that year alone, we managed to observe gun violence against 770 individuals, including very small children. Again, nobody was found responsible for the crimes. Left unsanctioned and even silently encouraged by the authorities, the border violence at the EU borders flourished. We have recorded accounts of sexual assaults, dog assaults, electric shocks, and mock executions perpetrated by national police officers along the route. Our limited findings show that in 2020, its severity and choreography of torture, inhumane and degrading treatment at Croatian borders has intensified in comparison to previous years. In Croatia, torture, inhumane or degrading treatment applies to nearly 90% of all recorded cases. Forced undressing and the use of firearms more than doubled in comparison to 2019, and inhumane treatment in police cars and dog attacks increased 2 times. Of increasing concern is the indiscriminate nature of the violence and abuse, with over 1/3 of observed pushbacks involving minors, the youngest of whom was just 5 months old. We have also recorded cases of 13-year-olds being forcibly undressed before the pushback from Croatia to Bosnia or Serbia. Working together in the Border Violence Monitoring Network allowed us to more efficiently address the omnipresent issue of crimes against people on the move that are not only happening at our borders, but also deep within EU territory. This is very important to acknowledge. A week ago, our member organization has filed 2 criminal complaints to the public prosecutors in Croatia for 2 separate cases against unknown police perpetrators due to the reasonable doubt that they kept in detention 13 victims in total. 2 of them were children, and they handed them over to 10 armed men dressed in black uniforms with balaclavas on their heads. After that, the men in black uniforms tortured, humiliated, and pushed them back from the territory of Republic of Croatia to Bosnia and Herzegovina. And one of the victims was raped by one of the perpetrators. Another criminal complaint was filed in July, requesting an investigation into cooperation between Croatian police officers and armed men in black, who are most probably members of the special unit of the so-called Ministry of Interior's Operation Action Corridor. In total, our NGOs, Are You Serious and Center for Peace Studies filed 8 criminal complaints against unknown perpetrators in Croatian police. Unfortunately, the State Attorney's Office continues to reject our criminal complaints as they seem to be no political will to effectively investigate the cases. Ombudswoman's Office is also systematically prevented from doing their own investigations, including an investigation in testimonies of police whistleblowers who have in detail described how they're being given orders to push people back to Bosnia or Serbia. Croatian Ministry of Interior will tell you that such allegations cannot be proven. But when there is a will, there is a way. And finding proof of pushbacks is really not that hard. Some of the MIPs from the left, including both Cornelia and Malin, who are with us today, had a drive along the Croatian border area with me a year ago. And we were able to directly observe Croatian police officers pushing people back over the green border. And while the European Commission is giving millions of euros to Croatia for the non-existing independent border monitoring mechanism, as Cornelia pointed out, our volunteers are independently observing such violations every day. It would be easy for me now to talk about impunity and even a chain of command in Croatian Ministry of Interior. But it is true that Croatian case is only the most visible manifestation of much wider EU policy, as Hope described in her speech. Collaboration between EU countries responsible for pushbacks is especially visible in the cases of thousands of people that were readmitted from Italy and Austria via Slovenia to Croatia, only to be illegally pushed out of the European territory. And the chain nature of pushbacks is then even further implemented by Bosnian and Serbian authorities, in most extreme cases, violently pushing people back all the way to Greece. The Black Book of Pushbacks is an attempt to systematize the evidence that we have collected so far, and it is our responsibility not to take it as a final point of our research. Let's take it as a collection of hopes of over 12,000 people who have been humiliated and tortured by European border officials. Hopes that their cases will be heard and brought to justice, that they won't be failed again, as some of them are still in the mud of border areas, hoping to survive the next encounter with Croatian, Greek, or Hungarian police. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. I think the kind of the way you are trying to seek accountability and justice and just like reaching, it's like hitting a wall. That's why also this moment is so important to show the extent and how systemic it is in the border regime, because that's at least our intention, that this will have to make the institutional responses come forward. Now we will move on in our program. I just want to say, because we had one question here on the web, where you can get the book. Well, you can get it online. For the hard copy books, you can also send an email and maybe it could be arranged. But for sure, everything will be available online. Then we have Andras Lederer working in the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, really monitoring also human rights abuses across the region. So please, the screen is yours, Andras.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. My name is András Lederer. I'm the Senior Advocacy Officer at the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, which is one of the oldest human rights organizations in Hungary, and the only one that provides free of charge legal assistance to refugees. As by now, many of you may know, Hungary is the motherland of pushbacks. Similarly to what Milena said regarding Croatia, pushbacks used to occur sporadically in Hungary in the past, but they were more like an exception. But then in July 2016, the Hungarian government, through an amendment to the State Borders Act, legalized collective expulsions from an 8-kilometer zone of the Schengen borders. With another amendment, this special zone from where pushbacks could be carried out lawfully was extended to the entire territory of Hungary. And I let that sink in. Pushbacks are lawful from the entire territory of Hungary. For almost 4 years now, according to Hungarian domestic legislation, it is lawful, in fact, prescribed for police officers to push back foreigners without valid documents to Serbia. Unlike in some countries like Slovenia or Slovakia, the Hungarian pushbacks do not even mimic any administrative procedure. People are not heard, people are not identified, people are not documented individually, and people, not even in theory, have the right to seek asylum. They are simply thrown out of the country as if they've never existed. This book contains about 12,600 stories, individual stories of people who didn't commit any crime, yet were punished in ways that not even sentenced criminals can be subjected to in Europe. It is a very painful book to read. It is painful because all the stories, all these physical and psychological wounds, they are a direct result of the actions and omissions of state agents across Europe that we pay for. It is not just our unequivocal belief in humanity, our unwavering commitment for fundamental rights in Europe that should make us care about these stories. It is the very fact that these actions are committed in our name by abusing our taxes. And I want you to think of this when you are reading these stories, and I want you to be very angry. As I said, and as my friends and colleagues said before, this book contains almost 13,000 individual cases. Over the past 4.5 years, since Hungary legalized these pushbacks, the police provides daily statistics about the number of people they push back. The number is over 50,000. Yesterday only, the Hungarian police pushed back 269 people over the fence, according to their own data. Since the summer of 2016, I've been working on documenting and litigating pushbacks at the Hungarian-Serbian border. We brought dozens of actions against Hungarian officials after extremely meticulous data and evidence collection in individual cases. Not a single one of these investigations ended with pressing charges against the perpetrators. We took these cases to the European Court of Human Rights as well, not only because pushbacks are in breach of the prohibition of collective expulsions, but because the absolute inadequacy of the criminal investigations. An entire system operates in upkeeping this impunity. And in that system of impunity, a special mention should be given to Frontex. The agency's fundamental rights officer at the time, and she deserves to be named, Immaculada Arnaez. She undertook 2 monitoring missions to Hungary in 2016 and 17, and her reports are damning. She specifically mentions 7 of the fundamental rights protected by the EU Charter that are at risk in Hungary due to the pushbacks: the prohibition of collective expulsions, the right to asylum, the right to an effective remedy, the prohibition of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, the right to life, the prohibition of refoulement, and the right to integrity of the person. She concludes her first report by saying, the agency may wish to revise its support. Otherwise, the agency is at risk by omission in respecting, protecting, and fulfilling these charter rights obligations. Following this report in November 2016, more than 4 years ago, Frontex's Consultative Forum on Fundamental Rights recommended that Mr. Leggeri, the executive director, and the management board of the agency move to suspend operations in Hungary. The executive director must have felt the need to give due consideration to this proposal, as it took him 3 months to even respond, and only to inform the consultative forum that operations will not be suspended in Hungary. After this decision, Ms. Arnaez undertook a second monitoring mission to Hungary, which ended with the conclusion that the risk of shared responsibility of the agency in the violation of fundamental rights remains very high. The 50,000 pushbacks occurred in this context. As a result, though, of concerted advocacy and undeniable evidence, the European Commission finally decided to take action. It brought an infringement procedure against Hungary, partly because of the pushback legislation in 2017. Yesterday morning, this case ended with the judgment of the Court of Justice of the European Union. The court found that Hungary's pushback legislation is in breach of EU law, in particular of the Return Directive and the Charter. This is an important victory, but there is a long road ahead of all of us. This judgment should have serious and immediate consequences. Frontex should suspend its activities until the legislation in Hungary and the practice is brought back in line with EU law. There is no question to that. But the Commission must not hesitate to enforce this judgment and, if needed, bring back Hungary to court at the earliest possible time to impose penalties should it fail to implement the judgment. But this case also sheds light on the very serious shortcomings of the agency's compliance with fundamental rights. At the end, I remind you, it continued to operate in a context where fundamental rights were violated on at least 50,000 occasions. Today's book should be the impetus needed so that the European Parliament launches an investigation into the activities of the agency and hears not only Frontex and other EU institutions, but the very victims of these pushbacks from Ceuta through the Mediterranean and the Western Balkan route, through the Polish-Belarusian border to Evros. This book is a testimony not only to the horrific systemic human rights violations contained therein, but to the unwavering commitment of citizens and organizations to uncover these. This commitment and the unique expertise and understanding stemming from this, also exemplified in the shocking collection of rights violations in this book, is the reason why we civil society organizations working on the ground, I believe, earned a place at these investigations. The investigation should begin as soon as possible so that the new migration package will already reflect on the lessons learned and ensures that such systemic violations no longer take place in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, András. Indeed, the situation in Hungary was maybe the first one that we got information via you and other activists, and despite our common work and your intensive work, it's clear that the developments have been going from bad to worse in many ways. So I just want to say, because we had a question about this is live streamed on YouTube, and it's being recorded as well, so you can watch it afterwards. We will share the link on our Twitter, Left in the EU, so that you can spread this talk also after it's finished today. So, and now we have one more guest speaker. It's Niske Beckman from Sea-Watch, Head of Operations for the Airborne Operations. And I just want to send with you, because we have some questions here that has been addressed a little bit by both Hope and András, but maybe Sea-Watch has things to say about the involvement of Frontex we have a question about that. We also have questions about the criminalization of actions in terms of your activities. Are you being persecuted, and is your life being made difficult by the governments or the authorities? So I know Sea-Watch can give witness of that, but also the rest of you, if you want to come back.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Yes, from the crime scenes in Croatia and Greece and in Hungary, I'll take you to the Central Med now. I'm Neska Beckman, as I was introduced, head of mission from Sea-Watch Airborne Operations. We operate 2 airplanes nowadays, and we fly north of the Libyan shores, covering the Central Mediterranean route that is well known to all of you. We mainly used to search for boats in distress. That was the original purpose of Sea-Watch. Nowadays, unfortunately, what we mostly do is document human rights violations. Often due to the criminalization of the NGOs, there are no rescue assets at sea. And also we, with our airplanes, have had to endure a lot of criminalization. And nowadays, I'm even lucky when we do manage to fly. I brought a few numbers today for you from our research. In order for us to fly meaningful missions, we also need to monitor the situation thoroughly. And this year so far, we with our airplanes have been involved in 136 cases. However, we know of at least 570 boats that have tried the crossing from Libya this year already, with over 33,500 people on the Central Mediterranean route alone. That is double the numbers of the last year, by the way, so this route has increased quite a lot again. And you can see that also we don't manage to be there as often as we would need to be and would like to be. There were only, we have to say, 50 NGO rescues this year, with 3,800 people rescued roughly. And often our ships are held in port, detained for ridiculous reasons. So the people on the move have to make the crossing themselves, often. When we fly, often witness non-assistance, often for longer than a day. We have had cases that we flew to for 3 consecutive days. Boats that were adrift in Maltese search and rescue area, where it's even definitely, without any discussion, European responsibility to assist these people. We have witnessed pullbacks from the Maltese search and rescue area by the so-called Libyan Coast Guard. And we have the sad record of at least 1/3 of the people this year having been pulled back by the so-called Libyan Coast Guard. That's about 12,000 people that were unlawfully brought back to Libya. And I don't think I need to talk much about the circumstances in Libya. We've all heard, read, and seen many reports over the last years of the conditions that the people face there. 12,000 people pushed back by the Libyans in over 190 boats. A lot of these were coordinated by Frontex. Frontex is present in the area nowadays with 4 to 5 airplanes at any one given time. They operate from the different islands in the Central Med, from Lampedusa, where also we operate from Sicily, from Malta. And they each have their own route that they're covering. So 2 of them are covering 2 of the main Tunisian routes that lead to Lampedusa and Sicily. Then 2 cover the Libyan routes. And then they have a few that are here and there. This has become more and more over the last years that we have been there as well. There used to be 1 or 2 and now just recently over the course of this year, there have been 3 new assets that they brought down. This is especially horrendous when we look at the details of this. We park next to them on Lampedusa on the apron of the airport. We often start at the same time. There's absolutely zero communication though with us. If they find boats, they keep it to themselves. They don't ever communicate with us, not even for deconfliction, which is actually highly problematic in aviation, as you can imagine. Because we have been there when they were still talking and when they were still communicating on the radio to, for example, the so-called Libyan Coast Guard. And in the past, this has then led to us finding boats in distress and witnessing the collaboration between Frontex and the so-called Libyan Coast Guard. And this was, of course, not their intention, and it doesn't go well for their public standing. So nowadays, what we witnessed a lot this year is that by all means, they try to avoid being traceable. This means that when we are in the air, they avoid any kind of communication on the radio that would point towards where boats in distress are. The maximum of information that we hear them say is giving directions. But if they only say go north, then it's very difficult for us to find where exactly they are. And they guide the Coast Guard boats visually. And we have sometimes been mistaken, for example, by the Libyans for Frontex assets, and having been asked by them to also guide them to boats. So this is one of the puzzle pieces that we then put together. How their collaboration nowadays looks like. And this is all really well coordinated. They do speak in the background a lot. For us, it's more and more difficult to really understand what is going on. There used to be, for example, the tracks of these airplanes used to be on online platforms such as Flight Radar. And this nowadays is, they are all blocked there because we have used this several times to call out on their illicit behavior and actions. And nowadays it's nearly impossible to track them, which means that unless we fly, the Central Mediterranean is an absolute black box. There's very few areas in the world where that is the case. Usually even military airplanes under most conditions can be traced, not so in the Central Mediterranean. That is of such high importance that they go to extreme length to hide any kind of evidence of what they're doing there. So only when we fly are we really able to still monitor such human rights violations that are happening in between the collaboration of Frontex and the Libyans. And we've seen this year, for the first time in many years, actually, there was one case where Frontex actually contacted an NGO, it was the Open Arms in this case, and informed them about a boat in distress. This came only after there was immense pressure on Frontex, also due to the work of you guys, of people on Lesbos and the Greek islands, of calling out Frontex behavior again and again, and a lot of pressure in the media. And they really had to work on the image a bit there, and then pretended to be the great humanitarians, and then informing an NGO finally. This is the first time in several years that this has actually happened. Other times Frontex has just let people die. And unfortunately, also because of criminalization, and also because we face difficulties almost daily when we fly, where in various regards they try to stop us from operating. This is where we could shine a light on more if they would let us fly. And of course, that is not in their interest. But our main fight basically is to be able to stay there, to watch what is going on, and to then also be able to contribute to such projects as this Black Book. So hopefully we will manage again and again to also free our airplanes to somehow be able to contribute to such important projects.
Thank you, Neske. I think it's actually to say that this part of the Mediterranean Sea has been made into an area where it's impossible to see what is happening. I think it shows how extreme the situation is also, and we were so many that were happy that when the search and rescue activities of states was withdrawn, that NGOs stepped in and started all these search and rescue operations, and we now see that your boats and your planes are being held back, and your actions are being criminalized. I think must be a priority to make sure that people working on the ground or at sea are not criminalized. That saving lives and saving people's, bringing people to security should never be a crime. And we are working in the left group on that, and we're working together with our colleagues from other political groups to address this. I have some questions about, so if somebody else, I think maybe from Border Violence Network or Andras from Hungary wants to address the issue of criminalization and attacks on your activities and have some thoughts about that. We have one more question here about also COVID-19 and whether it has led to intensifying violence, or if there are anything that you can say about that. I will also, we have a question about visibility of this book in media. And I just want to say that we have had some visibility in several countries about the book already. And we choose to launch it together with you on this International Migrants Day. But this witness that is documented here, it's something that we will bring with us into the work now ahead. And do please make sure to work with your national media to make sure that this is, is something that is picked up. So there is coverage today, but it should be something that we make sure is covered also in the days and weeks ahead, of course. So does Milena or Hope or wants to address the issue maybe first on criminalization, but also maybe I was wondering if you could say something about independent border monitoring, because that's, you have set up this network also in the absence of any institutional response to the need for independent monitoring. So if you want to address that also briefly in your sense. Milena or Hope? Milena, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, unfortunately, I can speak about criminalization because our NGO has been one of those most severely targeted, even in court proceedings against our volunteers. What we have learned in the past years is that we are obviously asking too many unpleasant questions. And instead of responding to these questions, it seems that for the national governments, it's much easier to try to silence those who are asking. In that sense, especially connected to the case of little Madina, the 6-year-old girl who died after she was being illegally expelled from our country, our NGO has been the one actually raising this question and informing media about her death. And soon after this, backlash really happened not only in the media, not only in the national parliament, where the Ministry of Interior tried to equate our work with the work of smugglers, but also in the case against the volunteer who was monitoring access to asylum of her family in Croatia. The volunteer who was actually never directly in contact with the family of little Madina, but what he did was to inform police officers of the presence of this family in Croatia after they have reached out to us, telling us that they're in Croatia again, afraid of police officers, and at the same time want to ask asylum. The Ministry of Interior in that case asked for imprisonment of our volunteer, for 43,000 euro fine, and for ban of work of our organization. This is a still ongoing case in Croatia. Regarding other NGOs in our network, out of 14 NGOs, 9 have been criminalized, either through formal investigations or through bullying in the field where they work. We have some organizations in the network that even choose not to be named in order to be able to continue their operations in the border areas in terms of, for example, providing NFI or other essential services to people on the move. One of the recent cases that we are experiencing now is the case of a partner of one of employees of our series. He was an asylum grantee in Croatia whose asylum was revoked without explanation after he refused to collaborate with Croatian secret services in what we could only see as the attempt to further criminalize our NGO. One of the topics that we have been warning about and obviously making our ministry a bit unhappy is exactly the topic of the independent border monitoring. As we know, European Commission gave 6.8 million euros to Croatia in 2018 as the part of the EMAS grant. And 300,000 euros out of this fund were allocated to establish independent border monitoring mechanism. Not only that the mechanism was not established, there has been severe underspending and also attempt to cover up the failure to establish such mechanisms. So for example, Croatian Minister of Interior even lied in the Libe committee, if you can remember, that this mechanism is implemented by UNHCR and Croatian Law Center, which actually later was denied by both actors. Representatives of European Commission also tried to falsely present this small mechanism that was actually funded by UN as something that was part of the EMAS grant. This is also connected to the question that Sophie asked in the comments about how we are following the money flow. This, for example, was an investigation that was actually led by one of the MEPs from the left in collaboration with our groups. What we see so far is that the Commission has actually decided not only to extend, but also to increase funding under the EMAS grant to Croatia, which is especially concerning because even when failure to establish mechanisms, even when underspending or misuse of funds is proven, very clearly proven, as it was proven in this case, it seems that the impunity is still ongoing. And we can only see it then as an encouragement from the Commission to continue with such practices.
Thank you, Milena. I have one question that's a little bit precise about, have you filed any cases in Greece? And I'm told that Hope wants to come in and answer to that shortly. And then I would, so short answer to that maybe, Hope, thanks.
Yeah, so I can give you a quick overview of what we have done in terms of Greece. So at the UN level, we have sent a complaint to the UN Committee on Enforced Disappearances, detailing how the use of illegal pushbacks, especially when being pushed back to Turkey, is a breach of international law. At the European level, we have made an application to the European Court of Human Rights to become a third-party intervener in a case brought by a legal representative of 4 victims of pushbacks over the Greek-Turkish border, a single mother and her 2 minor children, and separately an unaccompanied minor. We have also submitted 2 letters of concern to Frontex regarding their activities at the Evros border. So one regarding the rapid border intervention team deployment in March that was there, and another about the 70 people stranded on the island on the Evros River after being pushed back from Greece, which I mentioned earlier. The problem that we face in Greece is that the burden of proof is very high in Greek courts, and especially when people are being pushed back, their phones and belongings are stolen by police officers. Even when we can produce photo evidence of their presence in Greece, it's deemed circumstantial evidence. And the main problem that we face is it being said that we can't prove that people didn't voluntarily return to Turkey. So it's something that we're pursuing in 2021. We intend to more systematically reach out to the Greek ombudsperson regarding the cases that we've collected in order to trigger more formal investigations.
Thank you, Hope. That was very thorough also. And if somebody watching this wants more information, of course, on this, because this was quick to try to follow all your actions that you're taking, I'm sure we can contact Border Violence Monitoring Network and Hope Barker to get more information. Now, I have a question here in the chat, and it will be the last question that we have time for here before we have to conclude. And it's a question of, given the fact that you know, this seems to be a systemic, you know, this systemic problem is continually being denied and avoided. What courses of action can be expected at European level, or what actions would you like to see? So I will let you address that, Andres, if that's fine.
Thank you. And I try to be very brief, although this is probably deserves an entire different conversation. It was not out of courtesy. I meant it absolutely honestly, that I really hope that this collection of cases and testimonies, also backed by one of the major groups in Parliament, is going to provide an impetus for an overarching inquiry, not into what's happening at one or the other particular border, but what is happening in general at the external borders, and also what is the responsibility of European institutions, especially Frontex, but not limited to Frontex, in these things. And I believe that in the next 6 months, next 1 year, when Parliament will have to debate on the new migration package proposal, this issue should be on the top of the priority list, including, for example, what Milena mentioned, the issue of independent monitoring mechanisms, the role of the Fundamental Rights Agency, the role of civil society, the role of national human rights institutions in these, what kind of immediate mechanisms should be built in to the fundamental rights mechanisms within Frontex regarding uncovering of systemic human rights violations, as was the case in Hungary, but still nothing happened. How to strengthen the fundamental rights officer, both the number of personnel available there, but also the rights the office has, how to strengthen the consultative forum. I think these are very important and timely issues to discuss. And I hope, again, that this amazing collection, however shocking they are, is going to build this pressure that is needed. That pressure helped us, in the case of Hungary, to push the Commission into starting these procedures. And now we have a judgment. It's not a panacea to every problem, of course, but this is an extremely important step, the first such judgment in the history of the European Union. So I think it should give us hope that despite the difficulties and despite the size of the problem, there is a chance to move forward and to ensure that these systemic violations are an issue of the past and will not stay with us in the future.
Thank you. I think, just as you say, Andras, this is something that now, it's undeniably happening. Nobody can say that it's not happening. And from that moment and from that point, we have to make sure that people are held accountable. And you have, of course, us as a partner in that. As you know, we have even, our group together with the S&D group, we have asked for the resignation of the Frontex director. It's time to hold them accountable of the crimes that we know are being committed. And I think it's good. I think it was Neske that used the word, we are having crime scenes at the European borders. And we have to put an end to that impunity. So you know that we are also asking for the establishment of an inquiry committee in the European Parliament. That would be the most, I would say, strongest tool that we can establish at this moment to look into these human rights abuses and to propose immediate mechanisms to end impunity. That would also be a possibility for us to look at the funding streams and not only at specific cases, but actually look into how EU funding can be used and not used in order to stop these crimes. So I want to thank you, Hope Barker, Milena Zajkovic from the Border Violence Monitoring Network, Andras Leder from the Hungarian Helsinki Foundation, and Neske Beckman from Sea-Watch. And I will give over the floor to the screen to Cornelia Ernst, who is our coordinator from the left group on these issues. The screen is yours, Cornelia.
Yes, thank you very much. Oh my God, it's not so easy to speak after that. I'm touched by all of the details we heard today. But first of all, I would like to say, yes, it's necessary to go with these details in the member states and on the European level. And today will Marlin and Miguel, he comes from Podemos, Marlin from the left party in Sweden, they are going to the Commissioner Johansson and to hand her the black book, and I think this is a good sign. And we in Germany do the same in the Bundestag. And I think we need also the national level. The Brussels is the one thing, but the member states, there we have to show what is the role of the member states, and this is very important. What I take from this debate the following things: we need an investigation on the illegal pushbacks and violence against refugees, and that's why our group demands an inquiry committee to look what is the role of Frontex, but look at this problem. In January, we will discuss it again with the center-left groups, and we hope we can come to such an inquiry committee, but it's not alone our decision. Then I think what we need is an independent mechanism, independent monitoring mechanism on that, including NGOs and UNHCR. This is an old demand. We discussed it after our travel to Croatia with the UNHCR. We need transparent answer what is with the EU funds. We don't want that the funds are the basis to continue the violence at the border. That's very clear. Infringement procedures, I said it, and I want to be very open. We are fighting for a human migration pact, and we are cooperating with the center-left groups. We do what we can, and we ally with all fighting in the same direction. This you should know that we see not a single role of a group. We see our role to cooperate and to find a good solution. On behalf of the left group, I have to thank all experts, all guests, all defenders of human rights. And I think we need a very, very strong cooperation between us, the parliamentarians, and the NGOs outside of the parliament. And again, we will ally with everyone who is fighting for a human asylum system. The next step is the migration pact, and we will see what we can do, how we can come to a better solution than this horrible proposal of the Commission. But we need also the member state level. And yeah, thanks again to all participants, to our experts. Let's go in solidarity further. And yeah, we need optimism. And this is very important also for our next steps. And yeah, keep your health. And I hope we will see you again to the next meeting. Thank you very much, and bye.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.